Africa. Greetings to all of you who have joined us in this special webinar on the Al Jazeera documentaries, so 4 episodes on Zimbabwe. And a special welcome to my brothers and sisters I haven't seen for a long time. The Governor Peter Anyang Nyong'o there, Professor Anyang Nyong'o, David Johnson from Trinidad and Tobago, my brother next door, Brian Reptopoulos, Cassius Lubisi, David Moore, and those close at home, Helmut Obon, Hugh Kinnard, Maud, Miles Tandy, Usakika, and so on and so forth. We are also grateful to have as our moderator today, Mark Haywood, the editor of Daily Maverick, who has graced this platform before, very able and well informed on Zimbabwe. We're also grateful that we have the producer of the Al Jazeera documentaries on Zimbabwe, Alexander James, and a member of the team, Simba Chikanza, a Zimbabwean from Mandarwin, editor of Zim, controversial blogger. And last but not least, Rusty Markham, member of parliament in the CCC, and a man who has exercised so much oversight on the Public Accounts Committee, on the debt issue generally. And indeed, the topic today is not just about the revelations that are made through the 4 documentaries, although we have not seen the 4th one. We'll have to ask Alexander James what has happened. Zimbabwe has been waiting anxiously for that. But to what extent is the revelations made by the documentaries by Al Jazeera a tip of the iceberg? To what extent do they reflect the sick condition that Zimbabwe finds itself in? To what extent does it expose the reality of the new class, which Peter and I, when we wrote about political economy in Africa in the 70s, we never saw it coming, the comprador bourgeoisie, the class of people who have never worked in their lives, who thrived, who now rule our states in Africa. To what extent does this documentary throw light on that? In saying so, I want also to thank the Al Jazeera team. I know they have been criticized left, right, and center, but we want to thank you from my point of view in particular, but also the team, that you have really helped, as the other reports that Daily Maverick and Century have brought before us. You have helped us and helped Zimbabweans to have a greater insight into the manner in which our resources are being looted at the direct expense of the population, which in relation to the other countries in the region, I'm not saying those other countries in the region are any way better in terms of the plague of corruption. But I was around the region in the last few months and discovered that Zambia, which was behind Zimbabwe economically and in terms of economic development, is way 20 years ahead. I was in Tanzania, where in the 70s and early 80s, Tanzania was right down the bottom. Tanzania is 40 years ahead of us. I was in Kenya. There's no comparison anymore with Zimbabwe, even Uganda. And the point I want to make here is that there's a direct relationship between the looting that has been going on in our country rampant siphoning of our resources, the illicit financial flows out of Zimbabwe. Peter Anyang, I just want to make the point before I introduce the speaker, the moderator. Peter Anyang came to give the Pan-African lecture at SAPIS in 2017. And he hadn't been to Zimbabwe for a long time. And he said, as he began his lecture, he says, Ibo, where is the 15 billion from diamonds? I thought as I arrived at Harare airport, I would see cranes all over the city. Nothing. That is exactly the point. There is no visible evidence of the kind of monies that we, right last year alone, 9.7 billion receipts from exports in Zimbabwe. We know we should get 20 billion from exports in minerals alone. There's nothing to show. Nothing to show. Our hospitals are in a mess. Our education system is in a mess. Our infrastructure development, nil, apart from token roads here and there. So really, when we ask the question, is this the tip of the iceberg that Al Jazeera has helped us to view in such an amazing fashion? Is this just the tip of the iceberg? What does it mean? With that, Mark, please, went a bit too far, but I thought it's very important to give it context. You take over, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibo, and thank you to everybody who has joined this evening's webinar and important discussion. Greetings from Johannesburg, where I'm sitting this evening. As Ibo said, the title of this evening's discussion is Debt and Corruption in Zimbabwe. Is the Al Jazeera report the tip of the iceberg? And in some ways, it's a strange title because I think we all know the answer to the question that is being posed. Because just in the last 2 or 3 years, there have been at least 5 and probably more investigative reports published on the scale of corruption, of cartels, of collusion in the Zimbabwe economy, and collusions between the economic elite and the political elite. And Tony Reela has been posting some of those in the chat. I'll just go through them very briefly. February 2021, the report we published in Maverick Citizen about the cartels and the capture of the Zimbabwe economy and the cost of that. That report was written and researched in Zimbabwe. We had to publish it anonymously. 6 months later, the Century report into Kuda Tagwere, offshore dealings and sanctions avoiding strategies. A month before that, a report by Africa Risk Consulting titled The Political Economy Stakeholder Map. And since then, further reports about Simon Rudland, Gold Leaf Tobacco, Tonga Hewlett, etc. The story goes on and on. So in a sense, and then of course we come to the great work that has been done by Al Jazeera. So in a sense, we could end this webinar here because the answer is clearly, it is the tip of the iceberg. The more you look, the more you uncover, the more you see, the deeper that it gets. All of these reports are variations on a theme. So why should we discuss it? Well, before I introduce the first speaker, I want to say that it is very important that we have this discussion because as Zimbabwe approaches its 2023 elections, and because we know that this type of corruption and state capture is not unique to Zimbabwe, it's, I believe, just been perfected by the elites and by ZANU-PF. It merits a serious discussion. It also merits serious discussion because despite these reports, it seems to take place with impunity. And as Ibo has said in his introduction, It does real damage to the economy, to the real economy of Zimbabwe, to the social fabric, and it deepens, ever deepens poverty and inequality. So I guess as we listen to the three speakers, the question that should be at the back of our mind is what can be done to stop it? Or perhaps can anything be done to put a stop to this? And what and when can we do that? And so to answer those questions and to contextualize and to give us more of the evidence, I think we have an excellent panel. Unfortunately, we lost two speakers. Tendai Biti is dealing with some family tragedies and couldn't be with us this evening. And just recently, Khadija Sharif has had to drop out also because of some domestic issues. But we have a great lineup, starting with Simba Chikanza. Ibo has introduced him, but a UK-based journalist, entrepreneur, founder of the popular tabloid Zim I, very, very familiar with the situation in Zimbabwe and also a consultant on the gold mafia story. Then I'm very happy that after the keynote by Simba, we will be able to listen to Alexander James. I can see him on the screen in front of me, producer of the Al Jazeera series. So very, very important opportunity to get insights and feedback about the responses to that series. And then to comment on both presentations, very important veteran member of Parliament, Rusty Markham, who will be able, I think, to talk about oversight and what this means and what can and what should be being done about it, or perhaps why we're not doing anything about it. So I'm going to start with Simba. Simba, thank you very much for getting here despite your struggles. The floor now is yours to set up this very important discussion. Simba, over to you and thank you. If you, Simba, you may be on mute. We can't hear you.
Mark, can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you now. Yes, thank you. Go for it.
Thank you. I don't know, can you see me as well?
We can't see you. We just see a red S.
Oh dear, this shouldn't be. And I rarely struggle with Zoom, but today is one of those days. But I am not going to spend too long a time today because I would like Alex to be the main curtain raiser. I'm just going to briefly introduce him because he is the man. I don't need to mention my name, but just a brief background. Over the last 15 years, my dedication has been to try and tell the Zimbabwean story, but beyond into the continent, and to help to expose those areas that most conventional media houses are failing to. And an area of focus has been around corruption that is deeply embedded in filters such as religion and right up to the political realms. Sometime in 2015, 16, and 17, a new paradigm seemed to be taking over Zimbabwe that was covered under religion and what I termed back then a new level of religious extremism that seemed to be destroying the fabric of the economics of not just Zimbabwe, but several African countries. And in 2017, having met a few MEPs in Europe, it became even more important to investigate what was going on. And what became very clear in our work was that what has happened before to Zimbabwe and several other African countries. And that became what Africa is today, by and through missionaries and the religion that came with the establishment of the present-day African continent seemed to be there seemed to be a repeat where religion is going ahead to try and shape the future, not just Zimbabwe, but Africa. And so around that time, there were several individuals that we noticed that suddenly started wielding so much power over institutions from Cape all the way to Cairo. We saw Nigeria, Kenya, and particularly Zimbabwe. So that became an area of focus in our investigations. But around in 2018, after the 2018 elections, I had an opportunity to interact with some whistleblowers. Then I stumbled upon some transactions that pointed to heavy gold smuggling and money laundering. And I attempted one operation to expose this on video. And I contacted one of the gold smugglers, Kamlesh Patni. That began and started opening up a new window of knowledge around what is going on here, which I never thought I would. But fast forwards, a few months later, folks, I started getting interest from conventional media. I've been a partner of several media houses, including Deutsche Welle, the German broadcaster. But suddenly, Al Jazeera had an interest in this story that I didn't understand. And I want to confess that around that time, you know, when you're an investigative journalist and you get people phoning you, asking you, I want to meet you. Can I meet you? Can we have a conversation? Immediately, you freak. Your blood shoots up. So for several weeks, I would be avoiding these gentlemen until the man that is about to speak here, Alex James, literally traveled all the way to my city, to my office. And then within an hour of getting to my office, straight to my kitchen window, it was very frightening. And he becomes the only ever, since I started living in the United Kingdom, ever uninvited guest who would track me down, look in databases, and establish even where I live. But folks, little did I know at that time that the dedication that Alex had and his team was to investigate one of the best stories I think Africa, the continent, has ever had. And as you can see, this is the production that we are seeing right now. I also wanted to say, as someone who tends to focus on certain editorial biases, I wanted this story to come out immediately. And I remember we used to have arguments back then, and I didn't understand why Alex had a certain focus. And at one time, you know, when you're an investigative journalist, I think, Mark, you would agree with me, when you have such an experience, you can start to think maybe someone has been sent here to try and kill the story. But folks, the dedication, the patience, the time that these folks have taken to work on this project, bringing me in and teaching me as well, showing me, look, Simba, this is how real investigative journalism is done. My intention right at the beginning was I wanted to interview Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of your country, Mark, because I felt he is key to the corruption and to so many things. But I could have also had my own political bias because I wanted to really, however, in all this, Alex and the team were not interested in that. It bothered me at first. I said, look, why? Why are they not like me? Why are they not thinking like me? Do they realize? And folks, it's taken us 4 years working on this documentary. And this team, their dedication to want to get facts, no bias, no innuendos, no these pre-existing motives that we all could have because we want maybe to embarrass someone. We just want to take it this way. They even defied my own biases. This last 4 years, this whole period has been a period of learning, but I think for me, it has been a huge time to really establish facts upon facts. I am humbled, and I want to say to have worked with Alex and just to see the leadership and the team and what you are seeing right now, folks, has taken a lot of investment, a lot of professional critiquing, cross-referencing, peer reviewing. But folks, the man that you're about to hear speak is the man who visited me like a Jehovah's Witness to my window and would turn out who he is now to not just the Zimbabwean people, but to the continent. An investigative journalist whose passion is just to establish facts. So I'm hoping that as we are going to be asking questions and interacting and discussing, we understand the type of individual we have here. Mark, I don't want to talk too much because I will end up just rambling. Let Alex now come in.
Thank you, Simba, and we'll come back to you a little bit later in the discussion. Alex, in a sense, you don't need an introduction. You've been introduced by Simba, but I have to say we are very grateful to have you here. We know you're busy, and we are very grateful for this type of investigative journalism that leaves very little wriggle room for the people who are corrupting our countries and pitching us into poverty and deeper inequality. So Alex, over to you. You're free to tell us what you want. I hope you'll also spend a little bit of time just on the content of the series, because not everybody here may have seen all 3 parts yet. The 4th part is about to land. And yeah, the floor is yours, Alex, but thank you for taking the time at a busy time to be with us this evening. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and thank you also for your kind words of introduction, Simba. I'll just firstly say apologies as well if you hear some banging noise. They're doing some building work in the office next door. So I'll start by answering the question that you probably want the answer to. The 4th installment of the series is scheduled for broadcast tomorrow. We will be releasing a news story later this evening on our platforms, so it'll be worth tuning in for that. To give you an overview of the series, and the gold mafia has essentially followed, let's say, 4 key cartels who control the gold trade, but also money laundering operations in Zimbabwe and South Africa. And we explore how they work, but also how they are supported, the patronage they enjoy, and not just how they work in Zimbabwe and South Africa, but also how that money or gold is moved abroad, usually in this case to Dubai. But as we'll learn in part 4, Hong Kong also plays an important part in this, and how gold itself is a the money launderer's ideal vehicle for moving that wealth out of Southern Africa and overseas. And that's partly because of gold's unique properties in that it's incredibly valuable. It maintains its value, but also it can be melted down, reformed, and in that refining process, its history erased. And this, what we saw, in particularly in the third episode of Gold Mafia, which centers on Dubai as the main out point for a lot of this money and a lot of this gold, is how the system that exists there, the company structures, and also the I suppose the protection they enjoy, really provides a safe space for the gold mafia to operate from. And it's in this context, for example, when you see stories like last week's report that assets of Zimbabwean bank accounts have been frozen, of Simon Rugland and various other gold mafia bosses. It's in that context you really have to sort of question, well, is there really anything in those bank accounts in the first place? Because what our third installment of the film, I think, really clearly showed was that the money is very quickly and very effectively moved offshore, and that's something that the gold mafia themselves really specialize in. So, I mean, as you know, Simba has said, this has been a investigation a long time in the making, and it's an investigation that has relied on sources coming forward with documents, which we've had to do our own work on to verify and piece together, because a lot of the time the money laundering that you're looking at is completely counterintuitive. It doesn't make sense by its very nature, and so the documents themselves can be confusing. And it's through meeting people like Raj, the accountant who worked for Kamlesh Patni, and Daud Khan, the brother of the South African money launderer Mo Dollars, who really understand exactly what these documents mean, and from the perspective of being directly involved in the money laundering process, that they've been able to help us unpick that and describe what's happening. And then, as you would have seen from the films too, we had the opportunity to get in front of some of these people and hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So we began undercover work that led us to meetings with Kamlesh Patni himself and the ambassador Hubert Angel, and I think probably the lesson from that in terms of how it worked was really that money gets people talking, and really money was the main motivator. And as soon as we started having some of these undercover meetings and discussions, we started thinking, well, what's our amount? How much money are we looking to launder? And I think we kept on coming away from each meeting, particularly some of the earlier ones, that we were pricing ourselves too low. And so it was the final undercover discussions that were really happening around with the ambassador Hubert Angel. And we decide that we're looking to launder $1.2 billion, and that was enough for the ambassador to really prick up his ears. And I think what you're going to see in this fourth installment of the series is how that plan unfolds, and the patronage it will enjoy from the very top, so we're told, for it to succeed. And I think, I don't want to give too much away of what's to come. In that sense, it's worth tuning in for. But I think I'd probably conclude what I'm saying now by going back to your title of this discussion. Is this the tip of the iceberg? I mean, from our experience, I feel like we have been able to reflect a very small part of certainly some of the evidence of corruption that we were being presented with. There's only so much you can do in 4 films. And I think there's, among the documents that we saw, there was plenty of other information, other stories there. Certain money trails that we got so far down and weren't able to say as clearly and definitively what was happening as some of the things that we said in the film. And certainly in some of the undercover discussions too, the people that we meet talk about their involvement in other scams, other money laundering deals, and reveal other things about what happens in Zimbabwe. So I'd say certainly what we have found so far is the tip of the iceberg, and also what we're hearing from people who are coming forward as a result of this documentary series coming out. We have our own anonymous tips line on our website, agiunit.com, in case you're interested. And there's plenty of ways to get in touch confidentially, discreetly, and safely with our team. And the amount of interest that we've had, the amount of leads that have come through with people who have their own experiences with some of the people that we've identified in the gold mafia, or their own unique information. So I'd say certainly this is, from our perspective, the beginning of a whole raft of further investigation. And we are, a collaborative group of journalists. We're a relatively small team, and we're always looking to work with people in the wider world. So this certainly is, from as far as what we can see, the tip of the iceberg, and look forward to continuing this work for whatever's to come.
Thank you, Alex, and thanks to your team, everybody who's working with you. But before I move on to Rusty Markham, just because we're a little bit ahead of time, I'll throw a couple of quick questions at you immediately. And I may have more questions later on, but first of all, are you able to give any sort of estimate of the quantum of the corruption that you've seen, that you've documented, that you've been reporting on? And then secondly, have you encountered any resistance? Has there been any attempts to block the flighting of these 4 series, and what has been the official response? I remember when I published the cartel report, it immediately led to some very vicious responses, including very soon after litigation, which was initiated by one of the people who was named in that report. He subsequently, after pursuing litigation, dropped the case and paid all the costs, offered to tend the costs and paid those costs. But as you know, as an investigative journalist, there's attempts to chill and to prevent this type of extremely revealing information. So if you can just comment on those 2 questions, and perhaps just a third question, which is just how do you preserve the documents that you've come across? Because presumably, well, in an ideal world, they would be of interest to the police and to prosecutorial authorities. And I know that was something we dealt with in South Africa. I was one of the people who held the Gupta leaks for a little while, and that hard drive. So just if you can take a couple of moments to deal with those questions, and then I'll move on to Rusty Markham.
Certainly. So in terms of response and backlash, I mean, we, as part of our production process, we write to all of those that we present evidence about in the films to offer them their opportunity to reply. That's something that we do as part of our obligations under Ofcom, which is the regulator that regulates the media industry, television media industry, should I say, in the UK. And the people we write to respond, and we reflect what they say fairly in the films. I don't think there's been any meddling or interference on that front. But we certainly had some interesting replies. And I think probably something also to say in terms of the regulation, in terms of how we work, is that one of the good things about our regulator is that it's actually very protective of investigative journalism and undercover work in particular, as an important part of investigative journalism. That you will have seen some of the comments or responses about people claiming to be hoodwinked, or I think in one case they even claimed that they were fully aware that they were being filmed with the hidden cameras and were acting up to it. Hidden camera journalism is and undercover work has a long history in investigative journalism. It's you can cite stories back from I believe the 1930s in the United States of journalists pretending to feign mental illness so they could go into the asylum system and really expose some of the horrors of what was happening there. So there's what we're doing fits in I guess a long tradition of that kind of work, and I believe that the structures that we operate in provide us the space to do that and protect our ability to do that, and give us recourse to defend ourselves against accusations like that come our way. So I hope that answers, or gives some satisfactory answers to that point. In terms of the quantities, I mean, I've seen figures cited that the illicit gold smuggling in Zimbabwe amounts to $1.5 billion lost a year. I've heard people say it's much more than that. I suppose in terms of documents and things that we actually see, to cite one example, we look at a gold gold smuggling operation financed by Simon Rutland, that exports gold from the Reserve Bank to Dubai to a shell company of his, and this is all funded by dirty cash. And a bank tally puts the figure of those exports at just shy of $100 million in a year, and that's just one particular avenue of the gold smuggling operations. So I would say, if that's a small snapshot of it, the picture is probably certainly in excess of the 1.5 billion that I forget the research paper, but reports it. So and going into South Africa as well, the money laundering that was happening through Mohammed Khan's Mo Dollars business, again is looking at huge amounts of money. As far back as 2012, we see a document, a ledger recording 40 million laundered in the space of 4 months. So again, that's a money launderer at that point who's in his infancy, and we know that the operation grows and grows, and you have situations when the money launderers and their accomplices are buying gold refineries, and owning exporters in Dubai, so they can control the entire export-import process without any real scrutiny from the authorities, because they control all of that. So again, if you're able to control a mechanism like that, then the scale of the corruption you're able to facilitate is knows no bounds as far as what we've been able to find. And going on to your last point about documents, I mean, like I said, we're a collaborative office here in the I unit, and we will be happy to work with other journalists and investigators and share that information with them. It's our intention as as you know, the films have rolled out and we will continue to publish stories, we'll also upload documents to our website as well. So, you know, provide some sort of archive there for other journalists. But if people are researching a story that touches on something that we've looked at in the gold mafia, get in touch, and you know, we can talk more. But yes, you know, this is the tip of an iceberg. We've investigated so far, and if there are other people that are investigating some of these same characters, or believe that they are working on stories that what we have feeds into, then we're very happy to work. And when it comes to the authorities too, of course we're going to cooperate and work with those that are investigating some of these key figures in the gold mafia, whether that's the authorities in South Africa. You know, as I know that some of these characters are under investigation there, but I think as well, you know, and this speaks a lot to what we see in this fourth film, is that when a state is captured, you have to question the ability of some of those organizations to effectively target the corruption that they are claiming to be able to go after. And I feel this is particularly the case in Zimbabwe, when there's all these sounds about investigations into the gold mafia and accounts being frozen. And what we will show in this fourth installment is that the gold mafia exists by the patronage of the very top, of the number one, as they refer to him, the president himself. And that's what our evidence points towards. And when you have a level of individual control in a state, when a state is captured, when it works for the benefit of a powerful minority rather than its people, and makes policy decisions in their personal interests, you have to question the ability of institutions to be independent and to be able to effectively investigate that corruption. So we will cooperate, we will share information as and when it's needed, but I think there has to be some questions as to the ability of some of these authorities to tackle the gold mafia.
Thank you, Alex. Very, very helpful and very revealing. I mean, what you're describing is industrial scale corruption, as you said, corruption that literally, I think you use the word, knows no bounds. Corruption with the direct involvement and consent of the political elites, including the president, and corruption that has a bearing back onto democracy. And remember, this is a year of elections because it feeds war chests of political parties and the most senior political figures who have a lot at stake when it comes to democracy. And I guess the thing that shocks me most is that as we sit here and have this discussion this evening, it continues with near impunity. I'd be interested to know if anything has stopped as a result of your investigation or investigations that we have conducted and others have conducted. So please stay with us. I need to move now to Rusty Markham, MP, because I think, you know, what you've told us and what Simba has told us, of course, begs questions about control, about sovereignty, about politics, about the role of parliaments in preventing this type of thing from happening. Simba, I see you have your hand up, but I want to move to Rusty unless it's urgent. I'm going to bring you back in as when we get to the discussion. Simba, are you happy to wait, or would you like to come in quickly?
Right. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I could wait, but I just wanted to answer you on what you asked there about interference, because I felt that is a really important one.
Okay.
Because I have had interference that has hindered what I could have contributed at the maximum into this production. And that came from someone who was acting on the behalf of the First Lady, Auxilia Mnangagwa, and that is Mr. Hopo Chingono. Some people might have known about this, but this is as far back as the 15th of May last year, who threatened me and told me that my declaration of a deadline that I had done to finish my interview was blackmail, and he used very, very strong, extremely strong words that I've never heard from anyone, even who are in the institutions, the corrupt institutions. That type of interruption, it's something that we could discuss later on, but I felt in my work to be extremely disruptive to establishing at the maximum the extent of the corruption. I will end, and then maybe I can come back on this later on. Thank you.
Thanks, Simba. I think we will come back to it. And again, you know, what you're reflecting, I know you're in the UK, so is Alex, that it's very difficult it's impossible to produce this type of investigation within Zimbabwe at the moment. You wouldn't get anywhere. You would be blocked, you would be thwarted, you risk being kidnapped and imprisoned. And that's why this investigations from outside, where you are hopefully out of reach, is so important. So thank you again to both of you. Rusty, Markham, you've been listening to what has been presented so far, and I'm sure you're now bristling to comment on what we've heard, and also perhaps indicate a little bit about how we should be addressing and dealing with this as a way forward. So Rusty, over to you. You're welcome to have up to 15 minutes to talk. If you're happy to put your video on, that would be great. It'd be nice to be able to see you. Thank you. We see you. Over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Mark, just congratulations to Al Jazeera. This is exactly what the country needs. We need to expose this corruption. I just want to talk on 2 or 3 issues, basically the role of Parliament and the oversight and the problems therein. And then I want to go on to what I would expect the government to do or us to do, and just summarize that. On the issue of oversight, we have a problem with Parliament with the 2/3 majority by ZANU. So this is also complicated by the process where Parliament now operates off a Zoom-based program. So all of a sudden now we have very few parliamentarians attending Parliament. This is not conducive to question and answer and debates. It actually adds to the laziness, because most people would rather sit in the comforts of their home than participate in the debates. So as a result, and this started with COVID, as a result, we have a business committee which is basically defunct. The business committee is supposed to set the work for the day, so we all know what we're debating. So you'll see a couple of MPs walk in with files and briefcases, basically, of things, waiting to know what's going to come up for debate. Now, it's ludicrous when you consider the amount of work that the members of Parliament have to do. So we come to the issues of questions and etc. Now, when we have 2 sets of questions that we can ask members, ministers. This is particularly on a Wednesday, well, only on a Wednesday, where we can ask the minister either questions without notice, which are policy questions, and we can ask them with notice, which is a detailed written question asking specific issues. Our problem there is the attendance of ministers. We'll get as little as 2 or 3 ministers attending. Honorable Themba Mliswa has brought this up, I don't know how many times. and it hasn't in 5 years changed. They still do not attend. Now, how do you get an answer when the leader of the House has to answer all the questions with government? I mean, it's impossible for him to know. So he becomes a past master deflecting all questions. So the accountability, the oversight role is diminished quite a lot. We also have from the chair, which is the speaker, and the deputy speaker, we have issues where they end up protecting the ministers who can't answer the questions. And it's not an issue of attacking the minister, it's an issue of attacking the point. We're trying to get things resolved, and we want to know what's happening. So if you take issues for bills being debated, if you look at the PVO bill, the Public Voluntary Organization Bill, this was pushed through when the opposition weren't in there. It was pushed through aggressively by the leader of the House, and it's waiting for the president to sign. But then you take the other bill, the Finance Adjustment Bill, which is pertaining to the money with, for example, Command Agriculture, $3 billion, totally unaccounted for. That has been sitting in the wings, and because they can't account for it, it hasn't been pushed along at all. So we've got 9.6 billion still being waiting there, and it's 2-3 years down the line. And this is ridiculous. There's no oversight. We're being blocked to have oversight. So to think that we're going to have any oversight on the mafia gold, it's a dream. We have issues like all these mega deals, these mining deals all over the country. Talk of the lithium, talk of diamonds, talk of the new Chinese mine in Mvuma on steelworks. Parliament hasn't a clue what's happening there. It hasn't been brought to us. It's been asked about, nothing happens. So as a result, we're talking mega deals here. We're talking big money. We're talking huge investment. Why isn't it been brought to Parliament? For the same reason as the gold mafia. Gold mafia is the tip of the iceberg in the gold. But then when you look at all the other things, diamonds, we've all forgotten about so-called 15 billion that went missing in diamonds. We got no revenue for that. Chrome, lithium, the smaller metals, whether it's silver, we know nothing about it, and they're not going to tell us. It doesn't matter what questions we ask. I have in Parliament 7 or 8 written questions which are waiting statements from the ministers. Home Affairs still hasn't answered on the issues of IDs for undocumented people. The Minister of Agriculture, for example, has not answered 6 months, well, it's 5 months later, on why farmers have not been paid for their winter wheat in US dollars. The US dollar portion has not been paid to them. So where do we stand when these people won't answer? The Minister of Justice himself has pushed the Justice Uchenna report, which I've asked 27 times in Parliament. He hasn't answered a single question. He's actually pushed it now for the Minister of Local Government. I feel sorry for the Minister of Local Government because there's nothing she can say. But the Justice Uchenna report is a public funded document that the President has had since December 2019, and we have been jeopardized as a country by $3 billion of the intrinsic land value by land barons, cooperatives, etc. And to date, they won't give it to us. I've mentioned the issue of royalties. If you charge 5% royalties on the money just from gold, I guarantee you it would go a long way to issues. So on oversight, look at it this way. How many MPs have spoken in Parliament about gold mafia? Myself, Honorable Wende, and maybe one other. But it's very interesting that on the government bench, they have been totally mum. They have not answered a question. They have not had one single interview with the press, local or international. And this is absolutely shocking considering what Al Jazeera has exposed. It'll be very interesting to see what government's reaction is. So if I move on to what I expect, I would expect after the 4th episode very soon after this, the fourth episode, a statement from the head of state, for the simple reason, nothing in this country happens without his approval, certainly not on this scale. I would have expected one or two ministers to consider resigning, but that's a bit, that's hoping for too much. I mean, the Minister of Justice, can he explain it? Home Affairs, can he explain it? Actually, could the Minister of Transport explain why the ports are so porous that you can carry 60 kgs of gold? Could the Minister of Finance explain what's happening with the royalty collection of all this money? Could the ministers explain why only a minuscule amount of the money comes back to this country? So what should the government have done? The government should have seized the assets. Look at what's happened in South Africa with the Rutland case, with the cigarettes, etc. SARS have got involved straight away. They've attacked it very effectively. What have we done? Up to now, we've done nothing. We talk of seizing bank accounts or closing bank accounts. These guys deal in cash. The bank accounts is petty cash. That's the legitimate side of business. That's nothing to them. Have anyone been called into interviews? Maybe, but not really. They talk of seizing bank accounts, but I can guarantee you those bank accounts are all operating as normal. My biggest concern is this: where are the banks in this? The banks have a lot to account for. We have Macmillan talking of $20 million a week. How's that money moved? Not all of it is cash. Who and which banks are these people banking with? None of that has been looked at in our view. Where are the orders? So you've got no one who's resigned. You've got no one who's been fired. Not a single person has been fired. And we're talking of $20 million a week just from Macmillan. Then we go on to the issue of, so no one's resigned, no one's been fired, there's been no statements. What audits are we talking about? Forensic audits. What are Fidelity printers doing? Why have we not looked at Fidelity? Why have we not got people crawling over Fidelity printers like a rash to find out what's happening as quick as possible? Just a dead silence. In fact, the silence is deafening because the Fidelity printers under the Reserve Bank, the first order that should happen is the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. What and who and with which authority are both Fidelity and RBZ stamping documents for the export of this gold when we're not receiving the royalties? It's as simple as that. Look at our year-end accounts for the last 2 or 3 years and tell me that the royalties reflect the increase in business. There's no recon of the gold. There's no recon of the royalties. And we have in social media a lot of people talking about a motion. A motion in Parliament after what I've just described is a great idea, but it will be stalled until the elections are over. A motion would be a waste of time in my view, but it's not a bad idea to put it in. I just don't see it achieving anything. I think the pressure should be in audits. I think the pressure should be in resignations and arrests. I have a major issue with all the things coming up. We already, both parties are going through primary elections or nominations. With the expose that has just come through, there should be a review of which people have been nominated for the ruling party to run for them. We're talking of rather wealthy oligarchs funding the election policy. We've got there a war chest of 240 million purportedly waiting for the president to release. My question is, where did the money come from? Which oligarchs are paying for it? In 2018, we know that the oligarchs paid for it, and then the balance of the money was smuggled in under the RBZ debt, Zimbabwe, sorry, I've got tongue-tied there, but the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe have not reconciled any figures for us to see. There's been no audit in my lifetime on the Reserve Bank figures. The Reserve Bank chairman of the audit committee is the Reserve Bank governor. Now, is that not a conflict of interest? So the Reserve Bank never gets audited. They'll say they've done their own internal audit, but we need independent audits. So the next thing that I believe should have happened or should happen is an independent commission being set up to audit these people, internationally recognized. But the problem is this, as I've said, and the reason I use the Justice Uchenna report, when the report comes up, it's put under curtains and cloaks and no one can access it. You have to wait for someone to throw it over your wall so you can read what you paid for. So the shocking thing on oversight is very simple. We need total oversight of this. And I'm telling you now, don't hold your breath on Parliament, because not one ZANU-PF MP or minister has given an interview on the Al Jazeera report, which to me is a phenomenal report. In closing, I'd just like to say on this segment, I'd just like to say, if you look at the banks, they must be audited. But I can guarantee you, and you, Mark, are aware of this, the legal action coming against Al Jazeera is zero in this case. Because in my view, everyone is guilty as charged. So what do I think will happen? I don't believe anything substantial will happen because we're just before elections. People are going to wait for it to float away. And I encourage Al Jazeera to advertise their contacts for whistleblowers. This is the tip of the iceberg. We want the rest. So we go on to international issues. The government of Zimbabwe is in a serious problem now. We have just started our debt restructuring. We've just started our engagement with the international community, and this comes along. Who's going to restructure our debt when we're stealing our own money? Who's going to engage us when we've been telling them that we're battling corruption and it comes out? There is no ways any corruption can happen in this country without political cover. How high the political cover goes is follow the money. And then I can't leave out Dubai. Dubai have a lot to answer for when it comes to illicit gold trade, not only in Zimbabwe, in Africa. And those people who take the gold from Dubai, including the Swiss, must also explain why they're doing it. Why have these guys who got a wealth can just take it, put a stamp on it, and it's changed its fingerprint? So I encourage Al Jazeera to call for whistleblowers. I encourage the international community to review the theft of natural resources from the countries mentioned in Africa, because we are actually ending up like Russia was about 20 years ago, where the oligarchs are ruling and the people are dying. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Rusty MP Markham. We hear your anger and your frustration, desperation, understandably. And I think the message that you are sending to us here is that this is out of control, that it is happening with impunity, and that unfortunately, for as long as the current regime is in power and the current dispensation in Zimbabwe lasts, change and justice and prosecution is not going to come from within. Cry as you might as the opposition political party. Alex has had to leave us, but I'll thank him again. He's got to go and work on putting out version 4, episode 4. But let me just put a couple of questions to you, Rusty, and to Simba as well. I'd ask you, Simba, to weigh in on these questions. And you were partly touching on it towards the end of your comments, Rusty, which is, if we can't get justice and action and oversight from within Zimbabwe, where can it come from? You know, if you were sitting giving advice to people with power outside of Zimbabwe, what exactly would you say? What could the international financial system do? You made a little bit of reference to the role of the banks. You said, where are the banks in all of this? The need to audit the banks. What about international anti-corruption measures, which Zimbabwe is signatory to? Is there something that can be done outside? And also, let me ask this question, what about South Africa? Simba said right at the beginning of his comments that when this started, he'd wanted to interview Cyril Ramaphosa, but I feel as if South Africa, as the economic powerhouse in the region, as the country with the most sophisticated banking system, the most sophisticated prosecutorial system, etc., that if South Africa was intent, if there was political will in South Africa to address these issues seriously, that it may not be possible to stop it, but it would make it significantly more difficult to the benefit of the people of Zimbabwe and to the benefit of the democracy in Zimbabwe. So, Rusty, I'm going to invite you to come back and reflect on some of those questions. Then Simba, I still see your red square. I'm going to ask you as well. And while I do, any questions that anybody in the audience still has, please feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand. We'll bring you in a little bit later. But Rusty, if you can come back onto the platform to reflect on my questions first, then Simba.
Thank you for that, Mark. Mark, our issue is very simple. There are individuals on the international sanctions list. So you get a howl of sanctions, that you're encouraging sanctions, etc., etc. But sanctions don't come without a cause. Sanctions don't come because they don't like you. They come because you've done something wrong. So leaving that as it is, I have 2 or 3 things that I'd like to suggest. A lot, if not all, whether it's a courier or to the beloved prophet, they all got dual citizenship. Now, if we can't hold them to account here, they must be held account in the other country that they are citizens of. The second issue is, this is a tip of the iceberg. The companies with these people as directors, both in Zimbabwe, but mainly internationally, should be reviewed very urgently as to what they're doing with this money. Because, as numerous people have said, we don't have a health system. We don't have an education system. Despite what the propaganda says, we are desperate for medicines. So we've got the companies and we've got the dual nationality. The other people who have to be held to account, and it's going to be very difficult, is the recipients of the booty. They have to account to the country and to the people for the amount that they have taken and they have loosely accepted. And it's not only the gold going in there, it's what do they do with it afterwards? Does it move on to Switzerland? What happens to that gold? What happens to the money? Why do you accept and do not coordinate with the government of Zimbabwe as how much is coming there and how much is being received? And you know what? If you want transparency in this country and if you want transparency in the world, it is very simple. Publish the figures. Publish the gold that's leaving every month. Publish every single mining operations product that is leaving this country. Publish it monthly. But they won't. I am fully aware of at least 2 other companies who have pleaded to buy gold in this country. Why have they been delayed and denied? It's very obvious to me the government is incompetent or it's involved. And if I have to guess, I'd say both. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rusty. You didn't say anything about South Africa, but perhaps you'll come back on that point. Simba, would you like to talk now and reflect on some of these questions and what you've been hearing?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I think there are a lot of ways of seeing the story developing into real practical solutions. And this is something that could be realized in a matter of weeks from today, if not even days. South Africa poses as an avenue. Definitely, there are numerous ways in the South African jurisdiction system. We already have at least 2 high-level court judgments, one High Court, another one Supreme Court judgment since 2016. That is over what is happening in Zimbabwe. There is also the Justice C.C. Kampempe report over the electoral violence in 2002. But I am now focusing on, and we are dealing with finance level or crime here. Still, even in that category, we have a learned expert, Simba Maguchu, who was explaining to us that the ICC statute, the Rome Statute that South Africa is signatory to, has got a component in it that prosecutes corruption, literally corruption. And so building on these different cases that have already been ruled over what is happening in Zimbabwe, I see here a situation where cases that have not necessarily cases of incidents, crimes that have not necessarily happened in South Africa can be prosecuted in South Africa, even though they happened in Zimbabwe. Maybe some experts could come and explain to us there, but I'm not seeing there being an issue there. I'm talking kind of confident in this area, Mark, because, and I'll tell you why, even though I'm not educated in law, because I've played an active role to report on prosecutory methods as solutions for Zimbabwe since 2019, when after exposing the Speaker of Parliament over in Belgrade, Serbia, I managed there to connect victims with the war crimes prosecutor in that country to literally prosecute Jacob Mudenda, the Speaker of Parliament. He can't go back to that country anymore because there is in fact an indictment against him for war crimes over what he was doing. So, from that time, I have explored so many ways how jurisdictions like United Kingdom, we had some leading experts, barristers in the UK who have successfully prosecuted, even serving government officials while they are on government visit to the UK, come to our news network to explain that, look, folks, you might be struggling. This might be a difficult situation, but your community can actually get justice. Look at what we've done. One of those cases, we had a lawyer that explained she managed to get the Prince of Bahrain, a government official in Bahrain, issued with an arrest warrant. I mean, that is big. But I think Rusty mentioned here, Hubert Angel, definitely, number one, there's this issue of him being an ambassador. Zimbabweans will have to ensure that ambassadorial is stripped and work hand in hand with the British authorities, because they are the ones who have to accept. And I feel that every other country, because remember, Mnangagwa assigned him as ambassador at large. And by the way, Mark, has it ever dawned to you, that phrase, at large? What comes into your head?
At large, yeah. Editor at large, journalist at large.
No, Mark, there's no one who's called editor at large. Come on. At large.
Okay, tell us.
So out to do crime. free to roam and do crime. This is the dictionary definition of at large.
Yeah.
This is so clear that this man, and I will tell you, Mark, just to report to the people who are here so that you know, I have direct evidence from inside the establishment that they're not doing anything whatsoever. Everything that is happening right now is just plastic. I've got this that I could easily even report on. Even you,
well, feel free to say a little bit, Simba. I mean, this webinar is part of a public record. It will go for all time onto YouTube. And I think that we must talk honestly about these things. We must name names of some of the people who are involved, because the cost of this scale of corruption, remember, what did we hear from Alex? $20 million a week, $1.5 billion a year, whatever it is. It's a human rights issue. It's a human rights violation. This is money that takes away medicines, takes away healthcare workers, takes away rights to basic education, takes away jobs. So let's use this space to speak truth to power.
Yeah, you know, this is also happening against the background of a culture in Zimbabwe and South Africa where stealing must be rewarded. The ability to steal, remember, according to the historic a fight against apartheid in both territories, both countries here, the ability to steal, it was codified by the liberation fighters as a commendable behavior. So the more you steal, the more you must be rewarded. If you demonstrate that you can steal and do it and not be detected, you actually be rewarded, as long as you remain loyal to the establishment. I think here, as news publishers and journalists here, we need to be mindful of that, because we could all get excited. But look, it's being exposed. But let's be sober here and understand our historic background here. Reason why?
I hear you.
Yeah, the reason why you see the Guptas, who you played a great part, Mark, to expose. Yeah, the reason why those people could even fly into South Africa tomorrow, spend a few nights and go back to Dubai and not be touched is because the ability to steal and become undetectable, it is in the same, the same way that you would reward a soldier for hitting the target, for being a skilled shooter.
Yeah.
That
so Simba,
ability.
I hear you. I have two questions, and I see Tony has his hand up, and I'll come to Tony in a minute. But
I wanted to just finalize with this one here, which I think is really crucial. A lot of people are not looking into this area here.
Yeah.
Why are Zimbabweans? Why is the international community, publishers and journalists, not asking Hopo Chingono why he is protecting First Lady Auxilia Mnangagwa, who is key to us knowing the depths of the gold mafia? Why are you folks, Mark, not asking him why he disrupted my interview, why he threatened him, why he stands out as the only, listen to me, the only individual, not even a terrorist inside ZANU-PF called me to threaten me around that time, because I did have a few threats, but not at that level, where someone who is a celebrated journalist, okay, has got accolades and awards, calls me and threatens me, and uses extremely threatening verbs that he even printed on social media, on his portals, repeated those accusations against me, those threats, that I would be arrested in the UK. When I had a breakthrough, Mark, you're older than me. Do you know any journalist who has ever had an opportunity to have a video call with the first lady of a country? I did, Mark. It was, I don't know if I can call it a miracle. I had an opportunity where she called me back via video. You know, I call her, right? Normal call. Then she calls me via video call, perhaps wanting to know who I am. As soon as she sees me, I had a 35-minute engagement on video, face to face, with the first lady of this mafia. 35 minutes, where she would repeatedly plead with me, don't curse me, don't curse me. And I managed to ask a few questions. She would try to snake away, you know, try to just change things. But let me tell you, even after she had stopped, right? We had stopped our call, our phone call, our video call. And she was now telling me to send written questions so that we finalize. Even after that, she was still afraid of me a day later. And the only person who douses that fire is a man that you folks are typing in your newspaper, in your articles, and you're calling him an investigative journalist, and you never ask him why he is protecting the queen of the gold mafia, the first lady of this country, and why he is still to explain his role in dousing the fire. There was so much excitement between the 15th and the 14th, so the 14th and the 15th of May last year in the community. People for the first time, let me tell you, all over, including even inside government, you know, like state government workers, they were excited that for the first time,
Simba,
we have the first lady, right, being put in a corner where she has to answer. But quickly, I'm talking about here, Mark, right, a culture, right, where we can hold these people to account successfully. I had that opportunity last year between the 14th and the 15th of May. Never happened in the history of our country. Perhaps never happened in the history of any.
Thanks. Simba, you've made important points and you've put two very important issues onto the record, one concerning Hopewell Chinono and the other concerning the First Lady and their interference and threats around investigative journalism. I wasn't aware of it, and I think that's very significant for this webinar this evening. I'll come back to you a little bit later. I still see Rusty may want to speak. Tony Reeler, you've had your hand up for a while. Do you want to just come in with your question or any comment on what we've been hearing?
Mark, thank you very, very much. I'm struck by the north and south of the Limpopo, and I posted, I don't know, 5 or 6 reports right at the beginning of this webinar. And what struck me was that the exposure of the laundering, and particularly the guy who deals with all the illicit financial flows, Mo Dollars, as they call it in Al Jazeera, the Daily Maverick exposed more than a year ago. And that was a very serious exposure. And subsequent to that, South Africa was grey listed. Zimbabwe, amazingly, has been lifted off the grey list. So the question really is to both you and Mark and Rusty about the potential collaboration north and south of the Limpopo. It seems to me, just reading everything, looking at all of those reports, that there is a highly organized system that involves both countries. Now that has massive political implications, particularly political implications when, as you pointed out right at the beginning, we're heading to an election. And an election on the webinar series that we've been running that poses the problem that Zimbabwe is heading for yet another, flawed would be a kind word pointed about the election, but another illegitimate election and actually also points to the fact that quite possibly in all of this, that the proceeds of all this money backwards and forwards between the two countries is a way in which ZANU-PF might once again steal an election. So it's really a question about the collaboration between the two countries deeply implicated in all of this illicit financial flows. What is to be done about that? Because it's not merely that we have a bunch of criminals stealing money and getting very rich. It potentially has the effect of interfering massively with genuine democratic processes.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. I'm just going to respond very briefly to what you've said and ask Rusty to reflect on it as well. But, you know, I think Tony and colleagues speaking for or speaking from South Africa is that there is very little to zero political will in the ruling ANC to tackle the issue of corruption in Zimbabwe. They are well aware of it, or to tackle issues of maladministration and the drift away from democratic rule towards increasing authoritarianism. That's the problem. There are institutions in South Africa, such as the South African Revenue Services, the National Prosecuting Authority. I believe that you will find a will, but what is critically missing is political will to address this. And we can only measure political will in action. So this becomes an issue for people in South Africa to raise with our government, which is why is there this silence on these questions. Rusty, I have a question to you, and then I see Chennai wanting to raise a question. To what extent is there awareness amongst ordinary people in Zimbabwe of what is coming out in these media reports, of the scale of corruption, of the Al Jazeera reports? Is it a talking point amongst ordinary people, or is it just another story of corruption that people have almost become fatigued with?
Thanks, Mark. In relation to your question, there is a buzz in Zimbabwe about the quantity and the scale of the problem. For the first time, there's a direct link between the oligarchs and government. And when you're talking of this amount of money, there is no doubt that the political cover must go right to the top. But we'll see in the next week or so what the reaction of government is. I don't believe there will be much. Going to Tony's question on issues of North versus South, there is an unholy alliance between all the former liberation movements, and there should be an alliance between them because of the liberation movements.
Yeah.
However, when they misbehave, there is no one prepared to come and stand up and say, you can't do that. So if you look at the current situation regarding the South African SARS investigation and actions on the tobacco smuggling, who would they talk to in Zimbabwe about smuggling, about the Rutland issue, other than exposing their same problem? This goes back many years. We had the 2008 elections, or one of the elections, where Thabo Mbeki sent a whole entourage of generals up here who had a look, and their report was damning, and we have still failed to see that report. And that is just cloak and dagger looking after each other. Now we've got that thing. So bad governance, when you know there's no transparency, when you know there's no accountability, you do as you please. And once the corruption gets to the top, it means everyone right down to the man on the street can do as he likes. On your question of what people think, people here in the urban areas are abuzz, as I said. in the rural areas, the filtration is a lot slower because of the social media, the cost of data, etc., the language barriers, but it will filter through because there's an interchange between urban and rural folk. And I hope it continues because people are sick and tired. We've just got over the 15 billion, or even if it's a lot less. But if we got a 5% royalty on the $15 billion that was stolen from diamonds, imagine where we would be today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rusty. I've got two hands. I'm going to take, first of all, Chennai, and then followed by Kaiser Mlambo. Chennai, question or short comment. We only have another 15 minutes before we have to close this evening's webinar. So, but over to you, Chennai.
Thanks, Mark. I'll be very brief because I didn't miss most of the webinar. So maybe perhaps my point has been covered. But on the issue of like ANC and what role they can play in addressing corruption in Zimbabwe, addressing corruption in South Africa, is what really the documentaries have exposed is that this is a systemic problem. So we cannot look to South Africa for smuggling, for money laundering of the scale that we are being exposed to happen. It has to be, somebody is turning a blind eye to it throughout the system. And that individual is a very senior individual for this to continue. And so to really expect that we will see a change, that something will be addressed, I think is a lot to ask. It's a misplaced expectation because this is very much a systemic problem. I mean, even the Financial Action Task Force, they actually said that in Zimbabwe, we do not have the structural capacity to address even things like isolating people on sanctions, freezing of assets and things like that. There is no capacity, and that capacity comes from the political will, comes from the will of governance to be able to do that. So I think we are empowered by the information, but whether that we can expect that the system will change itself, I mean, I personally don't see that happening. I don't see that happening in South Africa either, because for the scale that we saw of the tobacco illicit trade to be happening, it's a lot of police officers, it's a lot of banks, it's a lot of border administration, it's, you know, a lot of people, a lot of officials are already turning a blind eye to this. And those same people will be the ones that you have to look to make a change, and they're not going to do that. So, you know, as the saying goes, you can't change the people, change the people, because this is very much a systemic problem. Thank you.
Thanks, Chennai. I think that's more comment than question, and I think we'd all agree with you. I think it falls heavily on civil society, on citizens, on the electorate, on investigative journalists to work together to try to make this type of conduct more and more difficult and more costly. You know, certainly speaking from South Africa, it seems hypocritical that on the one hand, the South African government is increasingly xenophobic, or parts of our government, towards people who are fleeing from Zimbabwe for socio-economic reasons to South Africa, but at the same time is propping up by omission or by commission a government that is fleecing the economy and making it very, very difficult for people to maintain life and livelihoods there. So I see this as a critical issue for South Africans to put onto the political agenda. Moving now, I see Simba has his hand up, but Kaiser has a question, comment to make as well. And then, because we're down to almost 10 minutes, Simba, I'm going to ask you to save your comments for the concluding comments, as well as Rusty, and I'll then invite Ibo Mandaza to make any final thoughts to close this webinar. Kaiser.
Yes, thank you, beautiful people, for an invaluable meeting. Yeah, I've been following everything, and even, you know, on our spaces, you know, collaborating with other people and stuff like that. I think, you know, this issue that we're seeing, it's now more than politics. I mean, we as Zimbabweans, we used to, you know that, you know, there was some form of corruption, but Al Jazeera has actually shown us how, you know, comprehensive, how massive it is. You know, people stealing billions and billions of dollars. And then the relationship between South Africa and Zimbabwe, we've always known that ANC was always, you know, lenient to ZANU-PF because these are revolutionary, you know, parties. When there were serious, you know, human rights violations, South Africa said, you know, there's nothing, because they were defending them. But the only beautiful thing about South Africa is that some systems are still working. Some organizations are still working. We see even, you know, opposition parties like people like Julius Malema putting pressure on the current government. But in Zimbabwe, the converse is true because institutions are captured. Everything is captured. But I think this thing, as I say, it's more than politics. Now it requires, you know, people in Southern Africa to come together and come up with a massive plan, you know, to reverse things and fight, you know, corruption. If it means building new institutions or homegrown institutions to challenge the system because SADC is not helping us at the moment, I think that's what we need to do because we've got no option. And I think it's not going to be a instant coffee solution, but I think for us to really clean up the system, ANC has to go, ZANU-PF has to go, and we must not sugarcoat about this thing. These two parties, to really get rid of this system, we have to think along those lines to say, how do we remove them? How do we work with the international community to, you know, resolve this issue? We've got a guy who almost collapsed the system of Kenya. He moved to Zimbabwe in 2013, and they tried to prosecute him. He's doing this very similar thing in Zimbabwe. So yeah, the point I'm trying to drive home is that it's more than politics. I know we don't have enough time, but we really need to work hard to ensure that these people are gone because they are criminals. And corruption has killed more than Holocaust. So we should look at it as, you know, see it as the biggest crime. And that's how we are going to resolve this issue. It's not going to be easy, but it's possible that we will resolve it in South Africa and in Zimbabwe. And the other good thing is that in Zambia, HH is wanting, he wants a meaningful progress in Southern Africa. So we have to work with people that are going to help us resolve these things. And as South Africans or Zimbabweans, we have to be at the forefront as we are dealing with this matter. It's more than politics. It needs everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaiser. Very important points. I don't see any other questions. Kaiser, it's interesting that you're the first person, I think, this evening to mention the word SADC, Southern African Development Community, which also is indicative of how little faith people place in SADC for resolving or commenting or condemning these type of things. And it's also links us back to the dissolution of the SADC tribunal, which was initiated by Mugabe, supported by Zuma, which would not have been irrelevant in a situation like this, with this level of corruption and its impact upon human rights and the impunity or the inability to deal with this at a domestic level. But I see no more questions. So Simba and then Rusty, I'm going to ask you to both take no more than 2 minutes in making any concluding comments. And then I will hand over to Ibo to close this evening's webinar and make any comments he would like to make as well. Simba, first of all, to you.
Hey, thank you very much, Mark. I, speaking from my observations over the time, do make the following comments, which is a concern that there might not be much change beyond the excitement. And the blame being not even politics, but merely a culture that is devoid of action. You know, a culture in which people spend time in social media excitement and they never take action. I speak here over what I have seen working in my career. In 2019, as part of my investigative journalism into the brutalities that were happening, particularly the war crimes, what ended up getting many of Nelson Chamisa's MPs out of parliament. I, having exposed the Speaker of Parliament in Serbia, managed to not just publish, but demonstrate with a team of legal experts and contributors that it is possible for there to be change. It is possible for a news article to be published today, and 2-3 weeks later, people are celebrating. The next story is one of reflection on what has happened. It began back then on the 12th of October 2019, when I managed to broadcast the Speaker of Parliament live on camera. But quickly, folks, I do not blame the locals who are inside the country. I feel that the future of Zimbabwe lies in the people who are outside the country. I see so many solutions with the diaspora, who are now over 6, if not 7 million. And this is because of the many prosecutory tools that are available. And we saw at Glasgow, the COP26 climate change, the very same conference where Hubert Anjo is being filmed on the documentary, a group of Sri Lankans who were there. There were over 1,300 Sri Lankans who came in buses into Glasgow. Zimbabweans, Mark, guess how many? There were less than 50 Zimbabweans there. And yet, the Zimbabwean population in the United Kingdom is nearly twice that of the Sri Lankans. And there's a man who was there, who was part of the group from Sri Lanka. He spoke to a whistleblower on camera. I was filming it. And he said, look, you Zimbabweans, only a few thousands in your country have been killed. In Sri Lanka, over 150,000, that's what he claimed, have been killed. And do you realize what we have done in our community in Sri Lanka, here in the UK? We have managed to prosecute 4 government officials using English laws while they are in office. So we're talking here, Mark, officials who fly into the UK on government business from Sri Lanka being prosecuted, not by the opposition party in Sri Lanka, but by citizens who live in the UK, who've made a decision. Mark, you tell me. And some people here are saying that, well, after the documentary, there may never be a solution. there may never be any change. And in our community, things will never change. But Mark, I'm speaking, you're talking to me, myself, on the 14th and the 15th of May last year. Change started happening. The First Lady, that woman that you're hearing in part 4, you're going to be hearing in part 4. Hubert Angel has already spoken about it because he's trying to firefight. That woman, the First Lady, she shivered on my camera for over 35 minutes. For the first time, there was change, and you could see that this is now happening, and it is possible. I saw it. But folks, I just want to say here, Mark, I'm worried by the culture of Zimbabweans who are in the diaspora. Soon after that, they spend more time, they spend days throwing tweets, throwing
Simba,
WhatsApp messages. Yeah.
I'm just going to have to ask you like 15 seconds, your very final comment, just because we're now past 7:30 and I see people beginning to drop off.
Okay,
so really just,
yes. So they spend more time celebrating Hopo Chingono's awards. The very same person who doused the fire that could have helped to bring some possible change. The solution, Mark, is in the diaspora. Even in South Africa, in your community, the South Africans can actually bring change. Those who are in the diaspora.
Thank you. Well, certainly we have all got to bring change. Thank you, Simba, for being with us tonight from the UK, for being one of our speakers. Now moving over to Rusty Markham, MP. Rusty, any concluding comments having heard this discussion?
Yeah, thanks very much, Mark. Mark, I just want to congratulate all the participants, but particularly Al Jazeera for what they've presented. I have 3 comments and 3 takeaways. The first one is, in the Al Jazeera report, there's an 18% commission on the gold. There is a 10% commission on the washed money. Forget whether the RBZ or Fidelity Printers documentation is legal or facilitating this, which in my view it is. But those commissions are huge. The business is untendered, the business is unknown. Therefore, the people that the government are using have dubious records anyway. So that to me is shocking. The second thing is, I agree, but I also disagree with Simba in the context is, yes, it's up to the diaspora, but my goodness, what are we doing in Zimbabwe about it? How can we go into an election now when no one in Parliament or Senate has spoken out about this issue? No one in government has spoken out about this issue. And finally, we must stop looking at the West and the East for our solutions. Our solutions lie in SADC. And the allegiance in SADC should be to democracy, to transparency, and to accountability. Thank you.
Thank you, Rusty Markham, MP, and thank you for your work in the Parliament of Zimbabwe, exposing corruption, trying to get accountability and oversight, which is what parliaments are meant to be for. Thank you very much, everybody, for participating this evening. I will now hand back to Ibo Mandaza to close and make any parting reflections. Ibo, over to you. Thank you, everybody. I don't see you. You don't know if you're on mute or whether we've lost you. Ibo?
Ibo, you're on mute. Ibo!
Okay.
The call from the wild. Okay, all right. Ibo? Okay, all right.
Okay.
I don't know what's happened to Ibo, but as his partner in crime, Mark, thank you very, very much. I think you did a sterling job on that. It's a complicated issue with massive implications, both north and south of the Limpopo and all the way to the Gulf states. It clearly was an issue that we could not cover in the kind of detail that we would. But nonetheless, I think we've begun to open there's an opening right now to begin to look at this. And we hope that, as Alexander James pointed out, the opening to collaborate between all these different platforms is enormous. And so between organizations like Daily Maverick, Al Jazeera, the Sentry, the opening up of this space and understanding these issues and the implications of it are hugely important. And they're particularly important when we face an election that will be probably, oh, I see, Ibo's trying to come in. Sorry, let me just go back to Ibo. He's unmuted, so I'm going to unmute him. Where's Ibo? Ibo, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, well, David has not unmuted. I couldn't unmute myself. I couldn't unmute myself.
Okay.
Hello, is David there?
Yes,
We hear you now, Ibo. You're audible.
Yeah, I couldn't unmute myself. I'm so sorry. I was watching the whole thing, and I couldn't unmute myself. I don't know what happened with the control by David. But I don't have much to say. I can't even show the video. I know something wrong with the control there. But I have nothing to say except to, before I thank Mark and the two panelists, is just to say that the big question is what's to be done now. And listen to Rusty Markham about the apparent, not apathy, but immobility of the political system. We are aware, Mark Haywood asked the question earlier on, of the extent to which this has filtered through. It's a big talk, Mark, this Al Jazeera, right through the society. And people are very anxious about the lack of action, beginning right at the parliamentary level, where it should have begun. The muted kind of response by the political elite. Secondly, the extent to which this thing goes right to the top. We heard from Alexander James that goes right to the top, to the president himself, to quote him, that this thing knows no bounds, that the meanwhile losing 1.5 billion a year, in my view, perhaps much, much more. And the question is really what's to be done? How do we organize to hold these people to account? How do we organize to conscientize the population, to force these guys to accountability? And indeed, in my view, to force them to step down from power. I think we should take the gloves off, in my view. It's just terrible. The Al Jazeera revelations are so damning that we dare not be quiet about it. And I think the media, people who are on this platform, news hawks, the Daily Maverick, should help us in putting the pressure towards some kind of action on these thugs. And lastly, but to thank Rusty, you've been very, very forthright. Simba, thank you very much for coming along with the James, but above all, my brother Mark Haywood, for a fantastic job as usual, and for responding to us at very short notice and doing a good job. The good news is that this thing is recorded. It's on Facebook. It's on YouTube tomorrow morning. Let's spread it. Thanks, Mark. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Simba. Thank you, Rusty. Good night.